We are in the third week of our series that we're doing on Nehemiah. And if you've been here the last few weeks, you've been tracking with us. And hopefully it's been beneficial for you. Maybe, if you haven't read the book, it's motivated you to take a look at Nehemiah and just hear the story and see how it plays out, because it's pretty cool in that regard. Not to mention the great graphic that Brittany Nana did for us. Thanks, Brittany, for all you do digitally for us. We also have a new, that's right. We also have, if you look at FCC Salem.church, she's upgraded our website and did a fantastic job with the input that we gave her as far as her trying to say, what is it that you want to convey? So if there's any shortcomings, it's on us, the staff. But if you go there, you'll find a lot of things resource-wise that might be helpful. If you're from the millennial generation, you're probably already there. You've already been there and done that, or maybe you weren't even aware. But if you do, you see that we have sermon notes, and we have serving opportunities. We have stuff that Brian's put on there about worship and songs that we sing. He's got YouTube videos that are of those particular songs oftentimes by the original artist. Just a lot of things on there that I think are worthy of going to and checking out and helping your life to be enriched and equipped in the Lord. Because we are building something here. We're building, hopefully, in our generation, the church that God is calling us to build out of the people and the materials that we have. And that's why Nehemiah is so timeless, I think. You remember me asking you who the shortest person in the Bible is? Were you guys here for that? Some of you were. Do you remember the answer? Nehemiah. And some of you rolling your eyes, of course. I was corrected by one of our elderly members who said, no, Nehemiah is not the shortest person in the Bible. And I thought, well, this is interesting. And then she informed me that it was Bildad the Shuhite. And I said, you got me there. Okay. All right. So that's it for corny jokes. And I'll definitely try to stick to a track that I'm more capable of executing. But I do love how this character stands out for a lot of the things that we're trying to do in our lives. And that is, maybe you're here because you're kind of broken right now and you need to find a way to a place of completeness and wholeness. Or maybe you're like other people who are trying to build something or rebuild something in your world, a relationship, or even in the case of what we're trying to do as a church, how you can take the physical aspects of our gathering place and upgrade them in a way that engages people in a spiritual process. And I think Nehemiah is the best go-to for that. If you've had the message notes for the last few weeks, I suggest hang on to them, because basically it's instructions and guidance for how you face any challenge. And it's stuff that is, for me, comes out of the experience of being a church leader for a number of years. And I just see it a lot more clearly than I did when I first started. And I, if anything, want to help people not have to reinvent the wheel and fire on their own like I had to do, but rather just take, maybe if I can offer something beneficial and just go with it and expand on it way beyond what I've been able to provide. And I think that's just a cool part of being in the church. And really, our lives are indebted to the people who have gone before us and kind of paved the way. I always marvel at Brian whenever he's up here. And whenever I think about him, I think about his grandmother who slipped in, slid down, saw her grandson, slid out. And that's Marion. I don't know if Marion's still here or not. She just said, I'm coming to check him out. And I said, he's doing pretty good. But sometimes it's like herding cats trying to keep up with him. But I want to just kind of bring this into focus a little bit about how Nehemiah and people that he worked with together as a group of people collaborating on something, try to accomplish something great through the strength and power of God. If you have your message notes with you today, I'd like to look at the front of the notes where you see the graphic. And I just want you to take a quick look at those 3 verses. I'm not going to read them for the sake of time, but those summarize the substance of what we're up against today. And if you've ever tried to do anything worthwhile, I can guarantee you're going to meet resistance, and you're going to have opposition. And it's going to come from places that maybe are within or without. And as you try to do something that is in alignment with a vision that God's given you, you have to be aware that it's going to come, and then you have to understand how you respond. And almost like in textbook fashion, Nehemiah takes his vision and he brings it before the people, and they begin to execute the work, only to discover that there are some people that aren't too excited about the walls and everything about the beautiful city that God had in Jerusalem being restored. And they did everything within their power, short of murder, to make sure that it didn't happen. And I just love this story because it tells me how I respond to resistance. And there are some surprises along the way that I hope you'll find. But for now, I want you to know that God is on a mission to restore what's broken. If you've heard it once, you've heard it 1,000 times. But I believe it, and I believe that the church is part of that mission in this season, in this time. As we come to church, we discover that we are also becoming aware of the things of God. And as we do, we see a responsibility start to set in where God is engaging us, of all people, to make sure that that word gets out. So I'm here to help equip you for that responsibility. If you look at your message notes on the other side, this is where we're going to begin. And the very first thing that I want you to be aware of this week as we're looking at Nehemiah chapter 3 and 4, mostly 4. Chapter 3 is somewhat boring because we don't understand all the different places that they're talking about rebuilding. But just rest assured that the project is underway despite the opposition. And in the middle of it halfway being completed, opposition pulls some pretty big stops and begins to wreak havoc on the building process. Just out of curiosity, and I asked the last group of people if they could tell me how many days it actually took to build the wall. Anybody know? Or rebuild the wall? Are there any people from the millennial generation who would like to weigh in on it? Because I know that your world is a little bit different in some ways than mine. We talk about AI. Millennials are, it's more like an intelligent enhancement with the digital device that's connected to their world. And I'm surprised somebody hasn't looked it up yet. One of our old school, Jim's got Arrested Development, so he kind of fits right in with that group, even though he's pushing his 50s.
I thought it was 57, 52.
52 days to build this wall. And it's a structure that you would think in 52 days, even with modern equipment, would be very difficult to happen. But for some reason, in that day, with God's help and their determination, they got it done, and they got it done quickly. And it's pretty cool to see, in the midst of knowing that people are going to be throwing wrenches in the process. I take heart in that, and I hope you will too. God is on this mission, but let's look now at the message notes. And if you find them within your bulletin, on the back there are fill-ins. And I just want you to be aware as we look at chapter 4, and I'm going to break it up into pieces. For Nehemiah and for you and I, the rebuilding process involves a hearty response to the resistance that wants to keep a great result from happening. That may sound kind of abstract, but if you've ever been involved in something that's important to you and you wanted to see it happen, and maybe it involved other people, you know that you have to engage yourself at a pretty substantial level of time and commitment, because it isn't just going to happen. And for Nehemiah, he knew that it wasn't going to just be, yeah, we're going to do this, but we're going to do some stuff on the side, but rather it's 52 days of intense concentration and focus and tunnel vision on one primary goal, and that's to secure this city so that we can begin to build the beautiful and good things that make life happen within it. And he had a vision that carried him through this process. Maybe you have something in your own life that you want to see change for the better. It might just be a change of direction, or a change of habit, or a change in a family dynamic. Or it could be a project that you're working on that's physical in nature. It could even be, some of you I know are involved in sports and coaching. It could be that you want to see this group of people get to a different level of capability through their potential. It doesn't matter. It's all the same. And the resistance is there to keep it from happening, which, when it does, a great result never meets reality. So if you try to do something and resistance comes in, how does it show up? For Nehemiah, it showed up in this way. Have you ever tried to do something and people made fun of you for trying to do it? Anybody ever have that happen? Okay. Maybe you're the first person in your family that went to college. People around you were saying, I can't believe you're going to go do that. Or maybe you tried to build a wall out of Legos. Maybe you've tried to take a crazy project, like a deck, and make it happen. And people are saying, yeah, maybe next year, maybe next millennium. And for Nehemiah, it was a little uglier, it was a little darker. In his case, there were 3 opponents that stood out, but they had a cadre of followers who reinforced everything they did. And they looked at Nehemiah and they just piled on ridicule and sarcasm. And those are painful things. They undermine the very morale that you have in your heart about what you want to do. And they discount and really diminish the significance of what you really have on your heart. And this is what they said in the verses that follow in verse 1. Now when Sanballat heard that we were building the wall, he was angry and greatly enraged. And he channeled that through jeering at the Jews and making cynical remarks about their undertaking. And first of all, why is he upset? What's so bad about rebuilding a city? Well, believe it or not everybody has your interest in mind. Not everybody's excited about what you're excited about. Maybe not everybody in your world is excited about you coming to church. Maybe even close family members are not too happy about that, because getting serious about God means that there's going to be a change in how you relate to that person. Getting serious about God means that there's something even inside of you that we just read in Scripture that wars against that. The Bible says we have a sinful fleshly nature that only wants to please itself. And it also says when we are born again, we have a spiritual nature, a spiritual mind that begins to go to work, where you're less concerned about that and you're more concerned about what's happening around you and how you can be used by God to make a difference. Maybe your struggle is internal right now. Maybe there's a voice inside of you saying, I'm not going to church, or I can't believe I'm at church. Surprised the roof hasn't fallen in. I can't believe that I'm spending so much time doing God things. And there's a battle that happens when you first start to come to the Lord that in some ways carries on in different forms. It keeps us from allowing that real estate of our lives to also have God's control. And Sanballat was a political leader in a region around the Jerusalem and the surrounding area who had a lot of power. He had a lot of influence, and he certainly made a lot of money from his position. And he had no interest in seeing God's presence restored in the city, and it certainly did not suit his agenda to be in collaboration or at least in agreement with what's happening. So he starts off by saying, I'll undermine them with sarcasm. And so let's move on and just look at how this resistance keeps us from moving forward. If the sarcasm doesn't cause you to lose heart, but rather fuels that vision even more, what may be the total undoing of it is your evaluation of what you see. And when Nehemiah evaluated the broken wall, it was pretty clear that this thing was actually a lot worse than he ever thought it would be when he heard about it before. It was rough. And I could only compare it to the friend of mine who bought a Victorian-style home, 2-story house, beautiful lines. It was definitely a sight to behold 100 years ago, but now that time and wear and tear have really caused it to not be as beautiful as it once was, the vision of my friend was, my friend, we're going to buy this house, we're going to do a few improvements, and it's going to look awesome. So they buy the house, and they discover that in order to beautify it, they need siding and windows. And they put that on, and as they do, they see that the roof needs to be replaced. They replaced that, only to discover that the power tools that were used in the process weren't working right because the whole wiring of the house needed to be redone. And then, upon completion of that, it appears that the plumbing is starting to crumble and leak. Now the whole plumbing infrastructure has to be remade. And if you were to add insult to injury, the old furnace in the basement that's 50 years old is no longer functional, and it could be leaking carbon monoxide, and the system has to be completely redone. So after 5 years, you tally all of the investment of time, all of the arguments and conflict that this project has created, and then all of the trips to Home Depot, which for some it was $100 Home Depot or $1,000 Home Depot every trip. And at the end of the process, or at least to that point of the process, because it just gets worse after that, they came to the realization, we really weren't very realistic about this when we started. And it's all we can do just to get out from underneath it. And sometimes the experience of that alone tells you that I see those old houses a lot differently. And Nehemiah saw these walls, and he saw good walls, and it was clear to him that this is a much bigger task than he ever anticipated. And that's part of the way that they made fun of him. In verses 2 and 3, these are the words that they said to him. They said, what are these feeble Jews doing? Will they restore this wall for themselves? Will they sacrifice? Will they finish it up in a day? Will they revive the stones out of the heaps of rubbish and burn ones at that? And then his sidekick, Tobias said, yeah, look at what they're building. If a fox goes up the wall, he'll break down the stone wall. And it's essentially conjured up this image that was common in that day. Where there were ruins, there'd be fox dens. Where there are places that were no longer worthy of rebuilding, chances are foxes have moved in. And they're saying, this is an archaeological dig. It's not a foundation for the future of this city. And it hurt. It began to seep into the minds and hearts of everyone that was valuing the vision that Nehemiah had cast out for them. So how do you respond to that? Let's move on. Well, it creates a lack of faith. I'm sure people are looking at each other, they're looking at Nehemiah, and they're saying, what are we doing here? Why are we taking this on? And they weren't thinking about God and how He factors into anything that is impossible. And they were starting to basically give Nehemiah the sense that they weren't ready to carry on. And then there was courage. And courage is one of those things that says, I can do it. When I face opposition, I can overcome. And when resistance rears its ugly head, I'm going to smash it down. And it's a wonderful quality to have in anything that you do. But when courage turns to fear, then things start to go south. And in verse 10, this is what we read. In Judah it was said, the strength of those who bear the burdens is failing. There is too much rubble. By ourselves we will not be able to rebuild the wall. And what I'm doing here is I'm building up how difficult this task really, truly is. Judah is a surrounding area, and the families had sent to Jerusalem fathers and sons and able-bodied people to help rebuild the wall. They're out here in the outskirts of basically this area, and they feel insecure from outside threat. They feel unprovided for basic things like food, and they are beginning to question whether or not this is a good thing. And they're telling their husbands and their sons, "Come back. This is a dumb project. It's really a fool's errand." And they were just basically reinforcing what the cynics were doing. All right. All that said, if you ever try to do anything, whether it be change your life and move in a good direction as opposed to how you were headed before, change a relationship which seems impossible, and the hope that there will be some kind of at least movement in some way, or you're trying to build something yourself, these are the type of things you'll face. Insurmountable. And we don't always get the upper hand. We don't always have the courage. We don't always have the faith. Sometimes we just don't always have the permission of the people involved or the wherewithal to follow it through. But on those occasions where God is clearly igniting this vision and saying, you go for it, and I'll be right there with you, then you just hit the gas pedal and go like Nehemiah. All right, let's just move on. In this first response, what does Nehemiah do? He names his adversary, Sanballat, Tobiah, Geshem. And I wonder, who's your adversary? Who is keeping you from doing what you need to do? Maybe it's yourself. Maybe there's a part of you or a response in you that's causing you to not go where you need to go. And you name it. And you say that thing or that person is making this not happen. And because you may not have any control over it, you pray and you ask God for guidance on how you should respond. And what Nehemiah realized was the only way you could pray for these guys was respond with this kind of prayer. May whatever you have done to sabotage this whole enterprise, may the effects of that intention fall back on your heads. And it's not a nice prayer, it's kind of a nasty prayer. And the Psalms have those kind of prayers where adversaries are piling on the psalmist, and he's saying, God, whatever they put on me, put back on them. I'm not suggesting that at every time you face adversity that you look at your opponent and you say, God, strike them down, or God, beat them down. But what I am saying in his case, maybe that was the best thing, because they did not have God's purpose. They did not have God's heart about things. They didn't have God's interest in mind. All they wanted to do was preserve their control over a region and shut God out of it completely. Now, if you're praying for a person like that, you might say, God, I hope they come to know Jesus as their Savior. But chances are they need to come to the realization, they need a wake-up call that they need God first to begin with. And sometimes in life, painful things happen that wake us up to the realities of God. And before, when we didn't see His plan, after facing some calamity in our own lives, we start to get it. And maybe you're in this room because God's been working on you in that way. I pray for people that they come to know the Lord, and sometimes when that happens, I see them have some suffering or some difficulties, and I'm saying, Lord, I'm praying for them to come to you. Why are you allowing them to go through this? Only to find out that it was that caused them to draw even closer to God. And I really love that. In anything that you do, there's going to be these elements in play. We're trying to do a capital improvement campaign, and this is how this relates to everything that I've been sharing just now. We have a roof, a children's wing, a front entry. We have brickwork that needs to be done. We have planting and planters that need to happen as far as repairs or renovation, reconstruction. We have critically downstairs women's restroom and repair and seal parking lot. And that's our list of things that are in alignment with this vision, but it may not be so glamorous until you comprehend the fact that without any of these things, this building cannot suffice as a really a good vehicle for what we do here. If you go to the children's wing, you find that there are buckets in different rooms, or at least there were till we had some temporary patching done. And it became very clear to a property and our elders that the life cycle of the roof is over. And you just go through the list. Now here's the thing. I'm in the role of trying to share with you why this is important. And the only way that I can do that really is to look at that list, and in my own mind I have to say, do we need a roof? Yeah, but man, it's gonna cost a lot of money. Do we need a children's wing upgrade? Well, there are some mechanical and functional things that need to happen, but do we need to create an environment for kids who can walk into that place and say, wow, I can't wait to come back next week? Do we need a front entryway that looks much more appealing and warm than what we have? Do we need brickwork really done? Can it just suffice for a little while longer? And honestly, do we need to do the downstairs women's restroom? And I'm not even going to question that one. That's just, I'm on that, because I know how power works in that situation. And then there is repair and seal the parking lot. We really need that. And at the end of the day, as I went through that list and I saw the merits of all of them, I was convinced in my own mind that the resistance that I had in each of those areas was being transformed into commitment to their significance. And so a lot of times the resistance just begins with us. And here's two things that work. If I could go to those three words: resistance, compliance, and commitment. It's not in your list, but if you're taking on a project like we are, there is resistance all over the place. But it's from within, without. But overall, it's not so bad that we're not moving forward. What we are doing is trying to recognize what it is that's causing a vision like this to keep from becoming a reality. And a lot of it is just communication. And I'm grateful for how that works to change the attitude from resistance to commitment. And that happens to each individual who's called to be a part of this process. We all bring elements of resistance to this vision. And we have two responses. One is we can say, well, it's probably going to happen anyway, so I'm just going to comply with it. I'll just, go ahead and do it. I'll give some if I can. If I can't, you just got to understand. And honestly, I would rather not have that. It's one of those things where you have to wrestle with the Lord, with your own understanding of the purpose and vision, and then you have to come to the conclusion about whether or not God is truly in this process, that He's truly energizing me as well as we collaborate together on a building that hopefully will be here for another generation of people to discover the Lord and to know Him. And when that becomes even more clear in our minds, the resolve begins to grow, and the courage regarding the commitment and the desire to see it happen energizes the whole process. Compliance is just what we do when we feel powerless to do anything else. And Nehemiah dealt with these 3 words with the people that he had around him. And I want to keep this rolling, so let's go on to the next aspect of it. The first response to the initial resistance was just to have a mind to work, to see it happening. And the people did. And after a while, half the wall's built. 52 days are not far. We're making progress. But about halfway through, something else happened. And this is the second response to the resistance that began to take its toll. When vision fades and you start to lose heart, then the adversary will return, and you will no longer feel like you want to go to church. You'll no longer feel like I want to spend time with God in the Word. You'll no longer want to really dedicate time praying. You'll start to lose heart that, I'm not sure if God's really even at work in my life on a personal level. On a group level, maybe you're committed to something as a group and you're starting to lose heart because the vision is starting to fade. And this was going on with Nehemiah. And the response came like this. Let's say we're 26 days into it because we're halfway there. This is the first aspect of the response. Go ahead and move on. When Nehemiah looked at what was going on, he prayed for courage and confidence in God. And I'm gonna zip through this, but here's what's going on in Nehemiah's mind. Maybe it was kind of like me. Anybody going to homecoming? Anybody been to homecoming? You guys are still going? Some of you have been. Homecoming is like a big deal for a lot of people who have parents in high school right now. And my son, who is really engaged in his social life, received a text from a girl, and she said, "Are you going to homecoming?" And the smooth operator that he is, he said, "Yeah, would you like to go with me?" And of course, she's the one reeling him in. And pretty soon we've got a whole production on our hands. And next thing you know it, I'm hearing the cash register. And I discover that we need a shirt, tie, and slacks. And I have no idea what's going on in the girls' household, but I'm sure the same thing, probably more so. And then my wife informs me that they have to go out for dinner, which the cash register is ringing even more. And then she informs me that there has to be a boutonniere and a corsage, which I'm thinking, we have a garden full of flowers. There's an easy answer here. But that obviously will not do. And I even thought about inviting him over for dinner, and I knew that probably wasn't going to fly. So as the dollar signs just keep ringing up, of course, I'm thinking, all right, he's got to pay something here. So we go to her house to pick her up because they're not driving. And I said, okay, we're going to wait here. You go and you talk to her dad and tell her that you've arrived. And I'll wait and see how this plays out. Hugely disappointed that Dad wasn't there yet. So I couldn't see how he was going to say, "Don't touch my daughter. If you do, I'll kill you," which would be a dad line. And so, the evening goes on. But at the end of the day, the point being, as I'm looking at two young lives, kind of a first date, at least for him, I'm just fast forwarding what is going to probably come eventually. Well, eventually there's going to be the one, a marriage, kids, family, and infrastructure. And I realize that just as I've inherited an infrastructure and an environment, I have to also pour myself into an infrastructure and an environment and a way of life that's going to be sustainable for them, because They have to have that from us, just like we had it from others, in order for him to know the same joy and blessing that we ourselves have had. And that energizes my vision for something like this, because I think about option A, where it's a blessed environment, or option B, where our country just sinks into a total hellhole because the greatest enterprise on the earth, the hope of the world, the church, wasn't online for its responsibility during its watch. So when it comes to things that involve God's vision, I'm there because I have an investment in these guys that are coming up. And when I see that when it's happening, like in Nehemiah, then I also have to defend that vision where vulnerable. For him, these guys were saying, all right, when they start working, we're going to attack them. They won't even see us coming out of the woodwork. And Nehemiah overheard that, and he set up basically a workflow that had the workman and a soldier side by side and a trumpet. Whenever the enemy came, they screamed it out loud so everybody knew, and they were able to defend themselves appropriately from their attacks. And you and I are vulnerable. The adversary knows that our strengths are not the place to attack. It is where we know that we're weak. And that's why prayer is your fundamental go-to in the whole thing. Did I mention that in the course of all of this, front and center of all this impossibility on the periphery was a presence that was leading the way for Nehemiah, and that presence was God. And when God leads the way through things that are an assault and resistant to your processes in Him, you're not vulnerable. But He has to be front and center. I'm going to, for the sake of time, continue on. You can read the text if you like, and you'll see how the vulnerabilities play out. Nehemiah finally came to the place where he stood before everybody, and he said, I know that morale is low, vision is fading. You need some feedback saying we're on the right track. So here we are. Remember God. Remember what He did in the Exodus. That same God is at work here. A puny wall is nothing compared to Pharaoh and his army and a body of water that keeps us from going to the staging place of the promised land. This is nothing. And when they heard that, they said, yeah, I remember. It is back on. He recast the vision, said, this is what we're doing, and God is with us. And if you're a Jew and a person says in your culture, remember, everyone's thinking, yeah, I remember. And they know that when you say that word, it's just a trigger for an image of the Exodus. Now, as a believer, and this is where the sermon ends, now as a believer, when we say remember, I want you to remember this, that behind me are two symbols that are representative of our Exodus, of our moment in time that was centered around the death and the burial, and powerfully so, the resurrection of our Savior. And when we do anything and we start to lose heart, we remember that. And the power that comes from that to show our victory over sin, and the power that comes from that is the energizing presence of God's Spirit being basically a harbinger for the new creation that is already at work now, but will one day fully be realized, is already happening. We remember, and that energizes us for the task. And if we forget that, then we lose our way. So, how long have I been talking like that? Sorry, I get so carried away on the vision. Did you hear me, or was it just... I want you to know, here's the bottom line to all of this. Any worthwhile undertaking will face resistance. It will happen. But do not lose heart, because sometimes resistance actually works in your favor. This resistance caused these people to actually be spiritually prepared and dependent upon God to inhabit this beautiful city once it was made. If that resistance wasn't there, they could have said, beautiful city, God is a take it or leave it option. But they realized they had to earn this spiritually as well. And when you face resistance in your life, it is God's way of saying, I'm using this resistance to build you up. When I first came to this church, I was in a conversation with one of the elders. He said, in my pocket is my resume. And he showed me a picture of himself. And it was a bodybuilder. It was John Panzot. And if you know John Panzot, he's, I don't know, pushing 70. Just, gives us hope. And I asked John, I said, how did you get that? And he said, I had to lift a lot of weights. There was a lot of resistance that went into breaking down those muscles so that they could be built back up again. And of all my brothers, I'm the one still alive because they all died early. And it's because I faced the resistance and I pushed through. And now I'm strong as ever. And the resistance in your life is there to help you be in the condition that you need to be in the Lord. And I think that's why God allows the adversary to carry on until that day when he says, we're done with you and we're locking you away forever. And I want you to be a part of that experience, of that new day, of that new creation, when what is broken is finally and fully made right. And it begins by what we remember. Be aware that if you want to finish well, you have to see the thing for what it is. And then you have to consistently bring God into the equation. And you never stop doing that. This side of eternity, and once eternity unfolds, he will still be at the center. Would you begin that habit of just stacking one day on top of another, of bringing God into the equation, and trusting that as you do, he'll take the stuff that overwhelmed you, that seemed impossible, and he'll make a way.